La primera pregunta dice, ¿cuáles son las perspectivas para incorporar el valor de los ecosistemas en las cuentas nacionales económicas?
My own experience is that this is worth doing, and it gives a great learning curve to policymakers. My early work, as you know, was on the Indian national accounts, not just national but also state accounts, so definitely I'm a believer that this is worth doing. But having said that, it's not the only thing that you should do, because valuing ecosystem services is an answer to so many different policy priorities, whether it's desertification or poverty eradication or livelihoods for the country, or alternative investments for climate change, mitigation and adaptation, and so on and so forth. And there are so many strategies that can be informed by valuation. I gave you a few examples. So I think valuing for national economic accounts is definitely important, but it should not be the only thing that you do. You should value for all kinds of other purposes as well.
La siguiente pregunta es, ¿debemos de valorar la demanda o la oferta de los servicios ecosistémicos?
Well, it depends. It depends on what is possible. So, firstly, if this were a market situation, then demand would meet supply. So, whether you're valuing one or the other, it wouldn't matter. But the reality is, this is not a market situation. So, you have to sometimes value supply through the absence of supply. As in, supposing this forest went away, and supposing I had to find alternative ways of providing nutrients and fresh water to the fields of poor farmer, what would that cost me? What would the irrigation system cost me? So you're kind of valuing an alternative supply. And at other times, you would value demand. For example, if you have typically values express themselves explicitly or implicitly. Sometimes if you have a park or a natural area or a garden close to your flat, the same flat, if it has a good view and is close to a park, could be worth 50% more compared to a flat which is not looking onto the park or the garden. That's the value of the nature. It's another form of valuation where you're valuing the demand and the price of that flat as a result of being close to and able to see a natural area. So it really depends what kind of situation you're in. And sometimes you may do what's called contingent valuation, which is to do surveys and ask people how much they're willing to pay. So once again, you're valuing their impression of their demand. So it really does depend from place to place. Situation to situation.
La siguiente pregunta del público es, ¿cuál sería el factor clave para comunicar efectivamente el valor de los servicios ecosistémicos a la población y a los tomadores de decisiones?
The key factor in communicating effectively the value of ecosystem services, I will tell you the answer is heart. Nothing achieves communication better than communicating to the heart of the individual rather than to the mind. But having said that, I personally have also had many problems in the past getting the message across. So you will meet people in policy, in government, and in business who are just not interested in listening to your heart. To them, you have to talk economics, and that works as well. But the first and best is obviously just appeal to the emotion and make them understand what you feel. And if that doesn't work, yes, there's always economics.
¿Cuál fue la motivación de la empresa Puma para valorar sus externalidades y qué medidas tomaría la empresa para reducir estas externalidades?
Yeah. In the case of Puma, since I know the executive chairman, I know what his motivations were. Mr. Jürgen Zeitz was firstly concerned about creating a new kind of company which was conscious of its responsibility to society, which understood the importance of stakeholders and not just shareholders. Secondly, he was concerned from his company's perspective, and he said this to me, that they were a company which used fresh water around the developing world, and everyone was saying that there is freshwater scarcity. They use freshwater because their rubber comes from rubber trees, which use water. Their cotton comes from cotton plants, which use water. Their leather is cleaned in freshwater. So clearly, freshwater was one of the key inputs, the natural inputs into their system, and clearly it was from locations where there was freshwater scarcity. And as the executive chairman of a company like that, he was simply unable to accept that there was no calculation of his total freshwater impact. So that was the second reason. And I think the third reason is to set an example. He wanted to show that this is possible, just to demonstrate that it's possible. These are forms of leadership. All three reasons for doing this were leadership reasons. But you see, the problem is, today is to come to your other aspects of the question, the problem is followership. How do you make this become part of the norm and the rules? Any one company can find out its freshwater or carbon impacts and therefore find out its direct or indirect effects on society, and even do some better planning in terms of the possible risk, because what is an externality today is a risk, and it can become internalized tomorrow. You can suffer the costs of freshwater scarcity. So therefore it becomes internalized because your product becomes unviable. So one is that you do respond to scarcity aspects. Second is that you can respond, if you want to fix the problem, you can respond through your supply chain. As you noticed in the Puma case a few slides ago, only 6-7% of the footprint of the impacts of Puma were actually from the factory. The majority, 75%, was suppliers of raw materials, and in other words, where you are growing the raw materials and where you are processing the raw materials. And that means you need to negotiate with your suppliers. You need to negotiate with your suppliers to make them give you lower impact products, and sometimes you may need to just change your supply altogether. So I know that Mr. Zeitz has been behind Puma's decision to use or stop using leather wherever they can afford not to use it, and to use plastics instead, because ironically the impacts because of water and health costs of tanneries is actually less with plastics than they are with leather, as it happens. So that's one way of handling it. The other is to renegotiate like Natura does in Brazil. They negotiate with their suppliers based on their cost of products. So these are the things that you can do to reduce your impacts.
En el caso de áreas protegidas lejanas, donde no vive gente, o la gente que depende de los recursos, de los servicios ecosistémicos, está muy alejada de las áreas protegidas, ¿cómo se incorporaría el valor de estos servicios en los ecosistemas?
Yeah. This is a very good question, because the way that total economic value works is to look at how much beneficiaries can pay. And in fact, what we have found and what we have said in the TEEP study is that the density of the beneficiary population and the wealth levels of the beneficiary population will obviously determine the valuation for the same ecosystem service, even if it is an identical service from an identical biome. The only way you can address this problem, this challenge, is a challenge actually. How do you provide sensible values for protected areas where there aren't visitors for ecotourism, where there aren't people drinking the water from there, or where there aren't people benefiting from the nutrient freshwater flows because there are no villages and farms nearby? The only way you can do that is to recognize the scarcity and the uniqueness of those protected areas and treat them as something for posterity. Because if they are so remote, the chances are that they are pristine, that they have unique biodiversity, that they may have some species which people have noticed but not really developed as ecotourism and so on. I would argue on the basis of uniqueness and the fact that there is probably a primary forest or an untouched, or not, hardly any place on earth is or sea is untouched nowadays, but scarcely touched location. I would argue on the basis of that uniqueness that it's a national treasure, and therefore try and protect it as a national treasure. I wouldn't try and argue it on the basis of ecosystem value, because you would end up with a low answer, because there are no existing beneficiaries. It's the future. Sorry, yes, sir. You can certainly do, yeah, you can certainly do that, but it's very difficult to find studies which will give, I mean, existence values are about, they're almost close to belief systems in the sense this is valuable because you must not deny the existence of this biome and that species and this and this genera and so on. So it's very difficult to drape numbers around that kind of concept. So you might as well just say, look, this is unique, it's almost untouched. There are no other places like this, and the best answer is seek a conservation decision based on the uniqueness. See, the other good point is if there is such a place, and frankly there are so few nowadays, chances are that there's nobody suffering due to the lack of conversion. If nobody has been there to farm so far, what's the likelihood that there's great farming value out there? And if nobody has been there, you know, for the usual things, as in let's build a car park, let's build another railroad, or let's build a motorway, the chances are it's pretty much away from where development and physical infrastructure is being built. So I think you do stand a good chance of carrying the argument through that, hey, this is unique, sequestered, let's leave it that way, and and then let's maybe argue on some kind of long-term ecotourism potential. But I mean, I just feel that, one could go around in circles trying to get existence values and then using that to make the case. I think probably a more effective way is just go straight for the...
This is a problem we have in the northern hemisphere where mining and development are the threats to these areas. They're way distant, but they're not unique in the sense where they do provide kind of global benefits. But service value argument for the region.
Yeah.
Build a city next to a remote wilderness and suddenly have value.
Value, yes. Yeah.
Use those values that are due to the remoteness.
Yeah.
So the challenge is how do you use a similar approach for explosive values when there is no clear beneficiary?
I mean, the only other way I could suggest is look at the greenhouse gas, the carbon values basically. I mean, a lot of these northern hemisphere developed context, remote location, mining opportunities are basically at the cost of deforestation. They're stripping off land in some form or the other, whether it's the oil sands of Canada. And you can definitely argue on solid grounds that there are carbon values for forest carbon values, and those are huge. You're losing those. You're losing those and therefore losing the country's and the world's opportunity. So that is another direction of argument.
¿Por qué el fracaso en aterrizar estos instrumentos económicos y mecanismos económicos con los dueños de los bosques?
Why do some economic instruments fail to benefit forest owners and local communities? What I think this question is referring to is sort of pure carbon conservation, pure carbon schemes. In other words, a kind of REDD+ which does not have any biodiversity benefits recognized as part of that reward mechanism. This can happen. The reason it's happening is because a forest is basically providing a whole bundle of ecosystem services, all the way from nutrients, fresh water, visitation, benefits for people, and of course carbon and timber and all kinds of other benefits. And you've picked one. So you've isolated one value out of a whole swathe of values that a forest provides. And by picking on that, you've basically devalued the other services from the forest. And that can lead to a situation that you described, which is that local communities who benefit from bushmeat and nutrients and fresh water and fuel wood and so on and so forth, construction, timber, non-timber forests, all of that will lose because they are not part of the equation. Their values are not being included as part of the consideration. So yeah, it can happen. And I think the only answer is when designing REDD+, be conscious of that, be conscious of the need to include and incorporate local communities, place values on what they receive from the forests over and above what you are getting compensated through some mechanism for carbon. So I think that's probably the way to think about that.
En su opinión, ¿qué se requiere para transitar de una mala economía a una buena economía que reconozca el valor de la naturaleza?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is, I used to think that, getting the message across to policymakers was the single most important thing to do, and I spent a lot of time and many years of my life trying to do that. But I've now come around to thinking that actually the biggest set of decision makers in terms of their impact are corporations. And the reason I say is elementary, which is that it is the direction of the economy and its resource intensity and resource use which is driving us towards planetary boundaries and destruction of biodiversity and so on. And corporations today account for 60–70% of the economy and jobs. And today's politicians are basically beholden to corporations, to CEOs. This is not a Mexico problem or an India problem. I can tell you it's everywhere, right? It manifests itself in different ways. Because if you think about it, today's politicians are trying to increase GDP, so corporations produce 3/4 of that. They're trying to reduce unemployment, have full employment or high employment. Corporations are employing 60–70%. They're trying to balance the budget. Corporation tax is providing some of that. Of course, they need campaign finance, so guess who pays for campaign finance, right? So no matter where you are, whether it's the US or Canada or India or Mexico or wherever in the world, whether you like it or not, today's key institution is the corporation, and today's politician is always looking over his or her shoulder to try and figure out, will this policy change make a difference to corporate profits or not? That's the first question that they're thinking of. So if you want a change to happen, my thinking now is that somehow get the corporation to change the way that it operates, change the dialogue between the corporation and the policymaker. What needs to be killed is what used to be known as crony capitalism. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Where it's not a real capitalism because it's a capitalism of favors, where the politician gives a favor to enable this sort of lazy capitalist to make money, and then he gets part of the money. That kind of capitalism is wrong. I think we need to get people and communities and NGOs involved much more than they are. I think we need to get them to understand that there's a greater commonality in what drives their problems, whether it's the problem of poverty or health or deforestation or whatever. Basically, it's the corporation's profit intent, the single-minded pursuit of private profits at the expense of public losses that is actually driving this. And therefore, today I believe that corporate externalities are the #1 challenge of any of these challenges. They're at the heart and the nub of not just the problems of the people in this room who are more interested in ecosystems, but equally those who are interested in solving poverty and public health and so many other issues of so many kinds. Unfortunately, today's NGOs don't seem to communicate amongst each other enough. So everyone's busy, focused in a narrow way, just solving, I'm only about women, and I'm only about children, and I'm only about babies, and I'm only about education. Whereas actually you should be about talking to each other and figuring out what's the root cause of this problem. Can you collaborate on a root cause solution as against just fixing the little bit that you've decided is really important for you?
Last question.
Yeah.
La última pregunta, ¿de qué manera considera que la valoración de los servicios ecosistémicos de áreas protegidas puede beneficiar a la agenda nacional para incorporar el valor de la naturaleza en las políticas nacionales?
Yeah. I think the answer is part of a larger answer, which is how do you think valuing ecosystem services, period, could benefit the national agenda to incorporate the value of nature into national policies. But it's an important part of the larger answer, because when you have a protected area, it's got a legal status as being protected, and it's got a budget. So that gives you a very clear rationale as to say, okay, this budget is actually supporting freshwater and nutrient supply into such and such villages nearby, and is supporting the maintenance and prevention of soil erosion into such and such dam nearby, and so on and so forth. So it's usually, not always, it's usually easier to make all of the cases that I'm describing to you in terms of economic valuation. It is typically easier to make them for protected areas. Of course, there'll be ecotourism as well, etc. So I think in that sense, if you can get going on valuing PAs, then you've proved a bigger point than just the PA. And then you move on to the full system valuation, because, you are all from spaces where you know this more than I do, that the protected areas and species and nature kind of doesn't really respect boundaries. And things move. Whether it's the jaguars of the Amazon or whether it's the fish in the oceans, you can't tell them where to live. Basically, they move around. And the whole idea is to understand the flux of life through ecosystems and around ecosystems, and understand that we are actually part of that flux. Today, we are a very dangerous and insensitive part of that flux. I would like us to be more sensitive and less dangerous, I guess. And I think valuing overall ecosystems and within that, PA is certainly part of that change.
Bueno, pues agradecemos al doctor Pavan-Sugdev por su presentación y por todas sus preguntas y comentarios. Thank you so much for your presentation.